All right. Hey, Rob. How's
Hi,
it going?
Tom. Good. Yourself?
Good, good. Glad we could finally reconnect after a bit and get another chat going here. I remember last time that we spoke, you like to bring up the famous Dostoevsky line of, if there is no God, then everything is permissible. See, I kind of like to flip that one on its head, just because I know like it kind of opens the door to things, right? And I say that if there is a God, everything is permissible except one thing, and that one thing is non-belief. Everything else is permissible. If you repent and give your life to the Lord after you've done God knows what, that's okay. But if you're a non-believer, that's the only thing that's unforgivable. So I kind of like to flip that quote on its head and say, it's a little bit backwards from that perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting objection because I think it gets at, okay, what does Jesus say when it comes to this unforgivable sin of blasphemy? Um, and so when you say the one thing that's not allowed is unbelief, I think that there's so many cases where it's like, okay, this person had doubt or has issues like denying certain things or I guess when it comes to, okay, you can doubt, and it can be it can go towards denial or it can go towards desire. But this issue of something that could be unforgivable, I actually think it's when someone has total certainty and says, not only is there no God, but I'm God. I define reality. That could be something kind of hellish, if you want to call it, as
I mean,
far
the
as
only thing the only thing you can really be certainty of is your own existence, your own consciousness, your own awareness. That's the only thing you can really be 100% certain of, is that you do exist. Everything else, you could have the brain of that, you could have living in a matrix, you can have all kinds of things, where yeah, it's infinitesimally small possibility of any of those, but they still do exist in some weird realm,
yeah.
right? So
I think therefore I am. It's like
yes.
Descartes. Like I think
Yeah.
I think therefore I am. It is sort of a seems a bit circular, but at the same time I understand where it's such an appeal to us in the West today, as far as saying, okay, there is this thing called consciousness. It's mysterious, but at the same time, we can know that we know something that we
But
are
what if
reflective.
consciousness is just a product of our nature, of our evolution, and it's just a label that we put on something that we really can't describe otherwise, because you can't pinpoint where consciousness is in the brain or the body or anything else like that. So it's kind of
Actually,
a
I think as far as neuroscience goes, there is a part of the brain. It seems in of late called it's called the part of the brain is called the anterior mid cingulate cortex, kind of in the center of the brain, and that's where neuroscientists are kind of excited because it seems that they this is where they locate the, if you want to call it, the will to live.
okay.
uh, and so they've studied this part of the brain where it's, if someone has, let's say, more self control, and I no, nothing against them, but they say like when someone is very obese, this part of the brain shrinks.
Yep.
But when someone is able to go through a trauma and carry on, this part of the brain grows. And so it's a visible signal almost of human willpower, if you want to call it that. But
Okay. So
I
wouldn't
think
that kind of prove my point that it's more physical than metaphysical, or something that's supernatural, or something that can't really, what I mean? Something that exists outside of us?
well, I think that's where it's like, okay, if you want to call it metaphysical, I'm just calling it mysterious, as far as this change that we're noting when it comes to, okay, here's where the body is adapting, because I think that's how we try to differentiate ourselves from the animals or any other species, is like that we have an adaptability, an ability to reflect, but also to plan ahead, that others do not. And that is somewhat mysterious because of the number of ecosystems that we find ourselves in that we can survive. Uh, and that kind of pointing to, okay, well, why are we different from every other species? Is something more valuable to us than the others? I don't know. We show an incredible
we
adaptability, but also an
we're
incredible
social
cruelty.
creatures. We're social creatures, right? We need each other. We realize that we can't live alone out in the wilderness. I mean, sure, some people can, but
Yeah,
I mean, for the
they're
most part,
rare.
yeah, you have those people, but for the most part, we are social creatures, and we depend on each other for basic life goods, for necessities of life. You know what I mean? You depend on the city to bring you water to your house. You depend on truckers getting your groceries to the store. You
Hmm.
depend on other people, right?
Right.
So that interdependency, I think, is where we can differentiate ourselves to animals, is the extent of that interdependency.
I would say I would go a step further though, because we have this type of interdependency, but then we also have what I call, for lack of a better term, just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot that other species do not have as well. And they have like a a reflex to survive. Sometimes we go the opposite way and do something that is beyond. I want to call it comprehension. Yeah, like that is once again, I think going at the mysterious and the metaphysical almost of calling something evil.
Okay, so you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, because I think that kind of ties into Dostoevsky and his novel *A Crime and Punishment*. Is like only we, you see other species, and maybe other species do ostracize certain members who break the code, but I mean,
Yep.
we as a species in particular have that down pat in comparison to
So
others.
let me ask you this:
Yeah.
Isaiah 45.
Okay.
Let's take this right from
Getting into the
your
book.
let's get into your famous book,
Yes.
the
It's not
bestseller,
mine.
the bestseller of all times.
It was written for us, not to us.
Come on, Isaiah 45.
Okay.
I form the light and I create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. How do you get around this and the fact that the Bible's saying that the Lord created evil? Bluntly, like I can't misread this.
Hmm.
This is not a figurative sentence. This is literal.
Right. I mean, the other, I'm just reading it too here. Isaiah 45 verses
I'm sorry.
6 and 7. I'm just reading it kind of
Yep.
just right. The rising of the sun.
Maybe there's some context prior and post that I'm not catching, but that
Oh,
one sentence is pretty clear.
yeah, I mean, because obviously that's sort of the problem. And you're highlighting that word context of reading it in the bigger picture, but it would certainly seem that God created Lucifer, the angel, and
With the foreknowledge of what he's going to do, obviously, too.
exactly right. So that there's evil and chaos as a result, it would seem that, well, okay, we then the blame should be held to the creator of that.
Correct.
Um, and I say, fair enough.
Unless you have a counter argument to what it says.
Well, I think for this, it's like I don't really have some type of watertight argument as to why, uh, the let's say a creator allowed for the possibility of evil to enter into the equation. I'd say it's more a watertight person as far as that person being Jesus Christ. When it comes to, okay, this person lived perfectly morally and taught amazing things, and then what happens? He dies the most excruciating way, right? The cross. And so that we want to call that evil as far as he goes through the whole spectrum of what is evil, as far
But
as
he doesn't.
one being betrayal and
He
deceit.
doesn't. But he's God. It
Yeah.
doesn't count. Like he knows if he's part of that of the Trinity, then he should have already known what's going to happen prior to it happening. And at worst, he knows he had a bad weekend.
Yeah.
And
What do you mean by when you say it doesn't count because he's God?
how could he not know what's going to happen to him by when he's sent down to earth and crucified and doing all this stuff to prove a point to himself about something that he should already know?
Well, I think he did know about it, right? Like you said, he had foreknowledge of it, so he knows about it and he does it anyway. Uh,
to
so,
appease himself of what?
well, I think that's where it's like, okay, so our understanding of justice is you get what you deserve,
It's
right?
not always the case, as I'm sure you know.
Exactly, right. So on the flip side, there's okay mercy. So you get what you don't deserve. Um, but then there's this other term of like grace or love, where it's like you get more than you deserve.
But
And
let's not equivocate things, because love for my family is something for that I can prove exists. Love for a god is something completely different. So love in the religious realm is not the same as love for my daughter.
yeah, but so
Can we agree on that?
yeah, I mean, but in the sense that like, okay, there's a level of
And same holds true for trust and faith. I have faith that my wife is loyal to me and that my wife loves me, but faith in the religious realm is a completely different context and different word almost, right? Like faith and trust hold true for something that has been actually somewhat demonstrable or demonstrable, whereas faith in something that's never even been proved to be possible is just blind believing.
mhm. Well, I would say to that is right. Like we acknowledge like in any relationship, there's an element of mystery or trust when you can't prove right that your spouse is not going to poison you at dinner. Like you didn't test the
Sure, but
food
again,
necessarily, but you look at the evidence,
my
right? And so
spouse exists.
you're
So we're talking about two different things here automatically.
well, yeah. I mean, our spouse exists, right? We can visibly see, taste, touch, so on and so forth. But there are plenty of things that exist that we can't see, taste, touch, that are beyond our senses, if you will, our five senses. And so when we get to okay, the realm of, if you want to call it
Like,
religion,
can you give me an example?
yeah, I mean, this, I think, kind of the a big example on a day to day is just you when you get behind the wheel of a car, you trust that the person driving on the other side isn't going to cross the double lines or run a red light. Like you have some trust in their intentions,
Sure.
in their ability, and so that's just something you kind of take for granted.
But I
Um,
also take it on evidence that I've been driving for 30 years and certain things should happen in certain situations.
right,
Like
right,
when I have a green light, no one else should be coming in the opposite direction coming through the intersection. So
right.
I have a whole lot of evidentiary experience that will lead me to making a decision. Am I going to go on a green light?
Yes, right. So that's right, and that's your personal subjective experience, right? That you've
But
accumulated over 30.
most people that have been driving any length of time have that same experience I do.
Right. And so there's a commonality to it. But then there's something where we kind of go, okay, and I think this kind of goes back to my idea of transcendence and immanence, in being able to say there's something outside of all the drivers where it's agreed upon. Okay.
Can can you name me something that's transcendent?
Yeah, I would go at love. You
How
mentioned you love, well, we love our kids, right? We love our daughter.
how does that
Uh,
transcend our death?
Uh, so so that kind of, I want to go back to what the Greeks, how the Greeks use different words for love, right? We're talking about familial love, which is storge. Uh, there's like a type of, okay, yeah, yeah, you want to call it passing along your genetic DNA code, whatever it is. Sure, there's that, and we kind of dance to that music of DNA. But there's also something that happens, as far as when it comes to our understanding, not just of mirror neurons and how we transmit our experiences to one another, but it also kind of gets at something transcendent when it comes to, the Greeks use this word agape, outside of
But,
storge
but I mean,
or phileo or eros. Is
I can kind
okay.
of stop that right there because,
Sure.
and I can prove it.
Okay.
So, did you know your grandfather?
To a degree, yes.
Did you meet the man?
Yeah.
How about your great grandfather?
I didn't meet him. I heard stories about him, but I didn't meet him.
Great great grandfather? No, obviously not, right?
Right. You just hear stories.
Do you love them?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly grateful
Did, did,
for
did,
what they
did,
did.
but did their love transcend their death to you?
I would say, in one sense, yeah.
How can you demonstrate that?
Well, I think part of it is how did they not only leave this world, but how did they live in this world? That they had, there's our search for meaning and purpose is
Say
tied
say they
into.
were say they were good, hardworking people that just did not believe in a God.
Okay.
Just honest, decent, hardworking people. You know, did their good work, lived life, had kids, just didn't believe in the Almighty.
Hmm.
How do you? Because I'm sure there's somebody in your family lineage that didn't believe in God.
Hmm.
Like we all do.
Right.
So how did something that somebody may not have even believed in get transcended to you generations later?
Well, I think that's part of where it goes at. Okay. Um, what's this word belief? If not how you act, how you,
It's a
yeah, sure,
subset.
talk, but like,
Belief is a subset of knowledge.
yeah, but I think I'm going back again to the beginning of, okay, you can have a doubt of denial and just deny everything and say I'm the all knowing one, nobody else is. I'm God, right? Or it could be a doubt of desire of, well, I don't really want to be accountable to something transcendent.
What if
Um,
it's just I'm unconvinced by the arguments, by the holy books. I was born without a God detector in my head. I
yeah, I mean
simply
that
I cannot force myself to believe in a God.
right. I think that's a really good point because that goes back to what Bertrand Russell said, is like when he was asked, okay, if you find out that there is God on the other side of death, what are you going to say to that God? And he said, you gave us insufficient evidence.
Yeah. And again, it's I'm not exaggerating when I say this, Rob, in that I would like to. See that's
Okay,
the
so
difference
the
between
desires there, yeah,
that's the difference between a lot of atheists and Christians. And I'm gonna say this very openly. I think
right.
a lot of atheists would like to be Christian because it brings a sense of comfort, right? But there's not a lot of Christians that desire to be atheists because I'd
Mhm.
like to believe in a God. I'd like to
Right.
think that there was something beyond my death that I'm going to go to, some heavenly body, and everything's going to be, butterflies and strawberries and rainbows.
Now you're getting at Pascal's wager.
But I mean, yes, it's a very comforting feeling.
Okay.
Okay. And I would like to be able to believe in something like this, but I'm simply unable to.
Hmm.
From my experience, from everything that I personally went through in life, I am simply unable. I do not have the God detector in my brain.
Well,
I've never had a supernatural experience. I've never had a revelation. I've never had anything religious ever in my life. So if God wants this relationship with me, he hasn't even met me 10% of the way to show me that there's a there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
So what would it
what am I
be like?
striving towards? What's that? Sorry?
I'm not trying to like corner you
No, go ahead.
on this, but I'm just trying to understand like what would be sufficient as far as there being a there when it comes to, okay, God, like my experiences of life have been, let's say, so painful or so confusing, and there's so much evil and suffering in the world. I don't see where you could point to saying, oh, that's sufficient evidence for me to now take on that you exist. Like, what would be sufficient?
I mean, if God is a personal God and
Okay.
has this personal relationship with everyone, then I don't see why everyone couldn't have that Damascus Road experience in some way, shape, or form. It wouldn't be proof to you, it wouldn't be proof to anyone else, but it would be proof to me, right? That something is there. So if there is something there, why couldn't we all have that Damascus Road experience? Why just Saul? Why is God just picking and choosing his favorites? If that's what he wants to do, then why did just pick and choose them? And like why do all this? If you're gonna
Well,
pick and choose who has the God detector, then you're what am I damned to hell for all eternity because I didn't get all the right equipment? Like I don't understand.
right. Yeah, that seems unfair. Uh, well, you mentioned Saul. Saul is clearly not his favorite. I mean, when he has that road to Damascus experience, he says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So there is sort of this weird thing where God meets us more in our pain or in our error than he does in so-called the goody two shoe, Sunday morning. That's where God meets people. So I think you're kind of highlighting this weird dichotomy we make of general revelation versus special revelation when it comes to the fact that reality has an identity. Like there's a code, it would seem, to the way we process our consciousness and information being presented to us through revelation of how much a person reveals to us. And it sounds like you're wanting an experience of special revelation of, well, okay, I, Tom,
Or
have
not
not,
even special, just any revelation, something.
something, yeah,
Right? Like something to give me the impression that there is a there, rather than just me talking to, I don't know what.
right. Right, and that's sometimes I struggle with is like, okay, is prayer just self-talk taken to a more positive level than ever before? Like, what is prayer?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
exactly what it is.
well,
You're
but I
you're 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 trying to kind of put out there what you want, and I think in a subconscious level your mind's going to want to get there, so you're going to do your best to get to whatever that desire, that prayer, whatever you want to call it is,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So unless you're one of these people, puts puts their hands together, says a prayer, and then sits on their hands and expects the prayer to come true, which your dad would describe as the cosmic bellboy, right?
right,
And
genie in a bottle,
yeah, which I understand. God may not work in that respect. Or, you prove to me that you exist by putting gold bars on my desk.
right,
Okay, well, fine, but you can give me something, right? Like no one's ever seen creation. No one's ever seen God's handiwork do anything. Mountains don't just appear out of nowhere.
mhm,
For God had whatever he thought of being a jokester one day. He thought, let's put up a huge mountain in the Midwest somewhere to make it really seem obscure, and we'll do it overnight when no one's looking, and we'll just pop it there, and they'll try to figure out why.
right,
You know what I mean? Like nothing like that ever happens. think things go through a process, a natural evolution. Sorry for the word.
Well,
but,
we do too, right?
Yeah, right. Like where people are like, well, where's the transitional beings, or the transitional species, and the best answer that I've heard so far is we're still in a process of evolving. In 1,000 years from now, we're not going to look the same, we're not going to act the same, we're not going to think the same. Right. So people will change 100%. We're still in the process of. So
but it would seem that there's still something that remains the same.
Like, we used to think that sacrificing children to get better farm crops was a good idea. Do we still? No.
No, but we all still like, and sure, we have adaptations and mutations, and you there?
Yeah, I think you just cut out there
Hello?
for a second.
Oh, okay. Cut out for a second, sorry. Like, for example, like the racehorse Secretariat, who won all his races by a long shot.
Yep.
Like they dissected him after he died, and they found his heart to be quite a bit bigger than the other races. And so there are, clearly genetic adaptations and mutations that make certain people like almost like freaks, or certain species have something different. But at the base, there's still a irreducibly complex kind of like walking a raised edge of what sustains life and what doesn't, across time. Whether it's the literally the Neanderthals, or us, of what we share, of like at a baseline level. And I think that kind of
So why?
baseline.
I mean,
Yeah,
let me
go
just
ahead.
ask you this:
Sure.
if 99% of everything that's ever existed has gone extinct, what kind of a design is that? Like, think about it for a second. Would you honestly design something with the forethought and the absolute knowledge that 99% of everything you make is gonna die off?
Yeah, I
Does
mean,
that make it?
companies do that all the time. Apple does that to its products, so people buy more of it, and so it's like, well, okay, they're just
But why would God?
loving it. Well, that's kind of the real question of why do we have an expiration date? Um, and like ultimately, I don't have a good
Now, do you
answer.
subscribe to the idea that evil is a result of free will?
No, because I think that there's different types of evil. There's, moral evil, if you want to call it that humans engage in, but then there's also natural evil, it would seem, like earthquakes and cancer and
But do you think that
tsunamis.
these are as a result of humans going array on free will?
I don't think it's just humans. I think, like we mentioned, Lucifer before and other entities. I don't think it is just humans. We have others to blame. And even in a way, it's like,
Could God have created a world without evil and suffering?
um, I certainly hope so. I would think that that's the idea behind, okay, it's saying that
Or
there's
or or
there's an
is
afterlife.
suffering part of the Christian theology, in
The
that
what?
is suffering part of the Christian theology, in that through suffering you get closer to God?
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
that's what Mother Teresa thought.
right. And I think that's where it's like, well, that's kind of sounds sick, right? It's like, oh, you're going to say that
I know,
suffering is good, right? And saying that, oh,
I
suffering
know.
brings us closer to God, and it's like, yeah, I don't buy that uh,
Okay.
fully. Like, I think that there's certainly suffering that seems totally meaningless, totally beyond pale, and so it becomes, well, okay, if we're going to say that it's actually God who suffers, not just humans or other entities and beings, like, what does that mean to me? I think part of it is recognizing, okay, something has gone awry completely, and to just hang my hat on, well, an afterlife will take care of it, kind of seems like a cop out. Um,
Agreed.
so that's where it's like, well, okay, if I'm going to say it's a cop out, why? Uh, I'm going to then think through the conclusion that, well, it's just this force that's behind all of this. It's not anything personal. It's a force that has no relation, no common experience to what I've gone through. Um, but it would seem that within the Christian story, there sort of seems to be the undergirdings of, well, no, God became a human and experienced the same temptations as we all do, uh, and went through suffering. And so, in the
But did he
midst of our
really?
own, well, I mean,
Could could
The
could
Romans
God
were.
can God suffer? But that seems contradictory
I
to
mean,
me.
I know that does seem contradictory, but I would say that that's kind of the paradox. That's the greatest paradox or tension, is that could God actually suffer, given his foreknowledge that
And
he knew this would happen,
and
and
then
yet,
can God himself die? Because
yeah,
that
because
doesn't
I
make
think,
sense either.
well, okay, when we say die, yeah, you can die, but you can also, and this is where it's holding an intention, is there can still be an existence even during death or after death.
So do you believe in a spiritual or a actual body and spiritual resurrection?
I believe in an actual spirit, like, sorry, just to get your point, your question, it's, do I believe in a spirit resurrection or a spirit and body? I tend toward the latter, a spirit and
Both.
body, both.
Okay. Okay.
And that there is some heaven out there, that when if it ever comes to visibility, it'll be because it came here, not not that all this is
So
just going to completely go away. It's actually that heaven comes here.
do you think that there's free will in heaven?
I think that there's a complete freedom. Right now
Okay.
we have partial freedom, but I think there's a complete freedom there.
So there can be a place that has free will and technically no evil, right? Because there's no evil in heaven.
Right, right. No tears or death or mourning.
So if God wanted to, he could have created where we are now without the evil and suffering, yet he chose not to.
Well, it seems that he did, right? That's the Garden of Eden motif, at least, is that he did create a place of free of suffering, free of
But
death.
if there was a Garden of Eden, there's no way that they could be held responsible for what went on, because they were being asked they're being asked a question before they had the knowledge of the answer. So it's not like they did what they did on purpose. Plus, God should have already known what they were going to do before they even created that little imaginary idea in the first place. Like the idea of the Garden of Eden and God not knowing what is going to be the end result is quite silly to me. Like why would you how could he not know what was going to happen? And ended up being that the serpent is the only one who told the truth, because God said you're going to die if you eat from the tree of knowledge, and the serpent said no, you won't.
Yeah.
So the serpent was the one telling the truth that day.
Why was the serpent the one telling the truth that day? Because didn't Adam and Eve die?
No.
Well, I mean, it would seem that they at least, yes, felt shame and covered themselves and hid, went into
Okay.
hiding.
But they didn't actually physically die like God said they would if they ate from this tree.
But eventually they did die. And part of it is like, okay, there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil, but then there's also a tree of eternal life. It's like they're separate. They're two different things. And I don't know why it's like once they bit from the app from whatever fruit it was, going at tradition again. I don't know if it was an apple, probably not. But and just like you said, like Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. Like I think part of it is like separating tradition from what the story is actually maybe getting at, and part of it is they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but then they said, okay, God says, okay, but you're not going to eat from the tree of life everlasting because you have now a knowledge that not only causes you shame or going into hiding, but actually it's self-destructive. That you kind of shoot yourself in the foot one way or the other, and so it has to stop somewhere. And so, hence, that's why they did die. It would seem. Um,
Okay, so hypothetically speaking, if they sat there and didn't eat anything, they would have died too.
well, no, because they had there's trees all around them, and not just trees for eating, but that look good, that were aesthetically
No, but what I'm
pleasing.
saying is if they just sat there and didn't eat anything, they would have died.
What I don't get is why Adam leaves Eve and goes out and they're isolated from each other. Because isn't that what God says is the first thing that's not good for man to be alone? So there's this isolation
I mean,
that
I don't get the whole story. How God created
ex nihilo out of nothing.
a clay figure and blowed air onto it, and that became man, and then from a rib of that man became Eve.
Yeah.
Like, what is this story even trying to signify? Like, it just seems so uh, silly. Like it's almost like someone's creating just some like a story, literally, just for someone's amusement. Like, it doesn't seem like it's being written in any kind of reality.
Well, I mean, that's all we have in reality, right? Is stories. We're storytelling machines. That's what we make up to kind of guide us through.
But we have actual history to prove what we're sometimes talking about, right? It's not just theoretical. We knew Abraham Lincoln was a US president. We knew Albert Einstein existed. There's quite a few things that we know that have gone on in history, yet I wasn't personally there.
Okay. Right. And so I think that's a good point you're making, right? Is saying, okay, well, once again, you can't use your senses to really fully get to know the person of Abraham Lincoln or Albert Einstein. And yet each of those people had such a drive or agency of asking the question why and to what end that they kind of grappled with, okay, is there a maker, is there a creator, is there something behind the prior to the human mind that I should kind of get in tune with more. And to go back to the Garden of Eve or Garden of Eden motif and story is like, I think at the very least, part of it is thinking through at the end of the day, me and you, what do we have when everything's taken away from us? If not something like called attitude, and then something called our word, like, and that's it. Like you have your word and your attitude, and that's like the last of human, you want to call it freedoms, uh, left to us, because that's kind of what's on display. It would seem in the Garden of Eden story is okay. Eve was there and had kind of a word, a conversation with this being that's like a serpent, and it's like serpentine. Um, I don't know if it's a symbol or if it's an actual snake per se, but there's a dialogue that goes on where there's a level of more than just doubt, because I don't think it's a doubt of
How was Eve
desire.
supposed to rationalize arguing against something that seems so magical and would seem almost godly, like a talking snake? Because if I came across a snake out in the woods that all of a sudden spoke to me,
Hmm.
I think something was okay. Am I losing my mind, or is this thing actually speaking to me? Like,
Right.
so if I came to the conclusion that I'm not losing my mind, that I'm actually speaking to a snake, and that it's telling me things that I could have never known, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's
how,
where it's.
how can you blame me for listening to this creature that's obviously got some kind of extraordinary powers that I have never seen or heard of before, and it's telling me of things that I could have never known. You know what I mean? Like how can you blame them for listening to them to the snake?
I think blame, you maybe just use another word as hold accountable,
Well,
that there's some
the whole idea, of original
responsibility.
sin, right? That's original sin right there, right?
Well, but more so that we would each, um, in that situation, would we get kind of what's the word? Ostracized, and not ostracized. What's the word? I'm trying to make sense of this. Why blame me for something you knew was going to happen? Uh, if not
And
saying,
not only known, orchestrated. You
well,
put all
okay, that's you're going back to the Isaiah passage, and I think what that passage, at least in part, says, right, is that there is a level of chaos and destruction that we all grapple with as a result of, if we want to
God.
say, we can point it back to God making, you made the world this way, so why is it like this? And not to say, oh well, okay, you know, God gets a get out of jail free card here, but it's like, look, at the same time, we bit the fruit because we thought we could become like God, and play God, and sort of think that, you know, I can play God in other people's lives, or in maybe just my own life, and then say that's it, and say that I'm not accountable to anyone, or not responsible for my thoughts or my words or my actions. Kind of that's the insanity plea, and sort of go at, well, yeah, but actually there is some type of uh, real causality, real connection, to this Eden story with our own lives, as far as, you know.
So do you think that this actually happened? Like, do you think this is literal? The Garden of Eden?
Yeah, like when you say literal, do you mean like that, like it was there were subjects there, it was a place,
Right, but do you think that that these two people started off the entire human race?
well, I mean, it certainly says that there's a, okay, it describes, okay, this is near the Euphrates River, near this place and this, and there is Adam and Eve, and so there is some type of answering the question of origin, like where do we all come from, if
Right,
not
but
from
there's but
a man and a woman.
New York in Spider-Man. That like that doesn't it doesn't tell you anything. You know, right? Just because there it says that there's a Euphrates River in a book doesn't tell you anything, right? Like if you look at evolutionary biologists, they say that we derive from a population of around 10,000,
Well,
not
but
two.
I'm saying, like, it doesn't mention the Isle of Atlantis or the moon being made of cheese. Like, it doesn't go fully into La La Land. It does seem to put places, whether it's between modern day Syria, Iraq,
But
elsewhere.
it also talks about the firmament and talks about the world being like I'm sure you don't subscribe to it, but if you look at the literal words, you could take it as they thought the earth was flat, right?
Right.
They didn't know it was a globe back
Hmm.
then. It doesn't say it anywhere, and if all by all inferences, it seems like they thought it was flat because it mentions all four corners of the world several times.
Well, I think that's where it's like, okay, they were making assumptions, but it's like, well, okay, who in any branch of knowledge, who has exhausted the branch of knowledge as far as how they have exhausted knowledge of it? Nobody. There's always an element of mystery, of assumptions we make. And so that kind of begs the question of interpretation. It's like, who has the right interpretation? Well, hey, like you really have to look at not just consensus as far as like, okay, what does the majority hold to, but
But isn't that the
also
reason why there's 1,000 different sects of Christianity? Because
I think,
you guys can't agree on what the one true word of God says.
yeah, well, I think that's where it's like, okay, unity is not uniformity. We don't all look the same or have the same things. There's yeah, geography and
But I mean, like,
time and
okay,
place.
just you put 10 Christians in a room together.
Right, right.
They will have differences in what their idea of a God is.
Sure. And does that disprove in any way, shape, or form that there could be a God?
I'd say if it's so subjective, then yes.
Well,
That if everyone has a slightly different idea as to what something is, then yeah, that has a hard time holding water for me. It's like we don't all have a different idea of what a Ford F-150 is. We all know it's a pickup.
okay, yeah. I mean, sure, Ford has one view of it, and Toyota and others. There's some, but I think when you get a room full of people and say, well, they all must say the same words and have the same exact interpretation, you're just trying to make that a room full of robots of uniformity. That
But
is,
if the Bible is the word of God, should it not be uniform, or should it allow for it slivering off into 1,000 different sects not agreeing on and almost on any element of it? For God, like, you know what I mean? Like,
mhm,
and at the very beginning,
right.
God took 6 days to make everything, and then rested on the seventh day.
Hmm.
Why? If he's
Right,
God, why did it take him 6 days to make everything? And why would he need to rest on the seventh day if he's God?
right,
I wouldn't need to rest ever. I wouldn't need to sleep. You know what I mean? Like, sleep is just a waste of time as far as I'm concerned, because if I didn't have to, I'd be a lot more productive in my life.
right.
So if I was a God, I would not have to rest. I wouldn't even be tired.
Well, I think that's where it's like reality, or yeah, that's a good point because it's like, okay, well, what is the purpose if it is not productivity? If there is an element of rest that we all need to like on
But
a
I mean,
baseline, 6 to 8 hours of rest. It's like there it goes again. There's something where we all have a common baseline need. Uh, and to your point, it's like, well, okay, why isn't there more of a common baseline agreement across the denominations? Um, I think there is to some extent. Uh, I got to get running in a minute here.
okay,
Sorry, but
no problem.
sorry to
I
cut it off here soon.
I can
But
cut it off right now. There you go.
yeah.